Hey everyone, welcome back to this explainer brought to you by Forge College. If you've been following along at our From EVM to SVM course, you know we've been tackling the absolute beast of a shift that is moving from Ethereum to Solana. Last time, in framing the account model mapping, we built out a really solid rubric. We basically laid down the ground rules for how state translates across these two totally different networks. Okay, let's dive into this. Today is all about taking that abstract rubric and turning it into a concrete, reviewable draft. It's time to start drafting our initial mapping.
Think of this explainer as our project schematic. We've got our rubrics, but now we actually have to put pen to paper. So here's the game plan for today. First, we'll cover the one-page blueprint constraint. Second, sketching the Solana layout. Third, rationale and hard trade-offs. And finally, the ultimate quality check. Let's jump right in. Section 1, the one-page blueprint. You know, if there's one thing engineers just universally adore, it's endless, sprawling, bureaucratic documentation, right? Okay, obviously I'm kidding. We absolutely hate it. And that's exactly why our engineering blueprint here has to be strictly limited. Which brings us to our core constraint, the number 1. We're talking one page, one single Ethereum state concept, and one clear trade-off. Now, you might be wondering, why this draconian limitation? Well, because forcing yourself to condense a massive design down to a single page, it ruthlessly exposes ambiguities early on. You can't just hide behind verbose paragraphs or vague hand-waving. I mean, if your storage size estimate is kind of fuzzy or your ownership assumptions are shaky, this one-page limit acts like a magnifying glass. It burns a hole right through those weak spots. It basically forces you to be precise, clear, and absolutely certain of your architecture before you even think about writing a single line of code. So put on your patent inspector hats, because here's the exact 5-step process we're going to follow to build this blueprint. Step 1, select a concrete Ethereum concept. Think of something super specific, like an ERC20 balances mapping. Step 2, draft a proposed Solana layout, and make sure to include an account sketch. Step 3, write out your rationale, tying every single choice directly back to our rubric. Step 4, record one explicit, heavily scrutinized trade-off. And finally, step 5, add your implementation notes. Just quick things, like a short command line hint to speed up testing. The whole goal here is clarity and execution. Keep it short, keep it punchy.
All right, moving on to Section 2, sketching the Solana layout. We are officially moving from the EVM's giant shared state tree to the SVM's isolated, parallelized islands of data. So let's actually contrast these two worlds. Over on the Ethereum side, we've got the classic ERC20 mapping. It's simple, it's familiar, it literally just maps an address to a 256-bit unsigned integer. Beautiful, right? But then look at our proposed Solana equivalent, a PDA per user balance account. It's kind of like packing your bags to move to a completely new planet. On Ethereum, everyone's luggage was just thrown into one giant implicit contract closet. You tossed it in, the contract sorted it out. But on Solana, every single user gets their own specific, individually addressed suitcase. And yeah, keeping track of all those individual suitcases definitely requires a bit more upfront planning, but man, it unlocks an entirely new level of throughput. And this brilliantly illustrates our translation matrix. Just look at how this perfectly aligns with our rubric. For state, the Ethereum mapping balances translates directly into a PDA per user account on Solana. For ownership, Ethereum's implicit contract ownership is replaced by program-owned PDAs. Now that's a massive mental shift, but program-owned PDAs gracefully solve the EVM's implicit contract ownership by making it explicit and incredibly secure. The program dictates the rules, sure, but the user actually owns the PDA. And what about access? Well, the frequent reads and writes of Ethereum become order-of-one parallelizable operations on Solana. That order-of-one, that is literally the holy grail. It means no matter how many users interact with your protocol, reading and writing to their specific balance account takes the exact same constant amount of time. It's an absolute game changer that completely stops the network from getting bogged down. 80. I just want you to pause for a second and really appreciate that number. Because like a meticulous architect estimating the exact amount of steel for a bridge, we have to calculate our rent-exempt byte size perfectly. For an anchor account sketch of this PDA, we need 8 bytes for the mandatory anchor discriminator. That's a security feature you can never, ever skip. Then we need 8 bytes for the 64-bit balance itself and 32 bytes for the owner public key. That brings us to exactly 48 bytes. But we're engineers, right? We plan for the unknown. We plan for future upgrades. So we round up safely to 80 bytes for our rent buffer calculation. You absolutely have to know your numbers intimately, because honestly, if you're just guessing, your contract is going to run out of funds, your accounts won't initialize, or worst case scenario, your user's state actually gets evicted. No way we're letting that happen. Let's jump into Section 3, Rationale and Hard Tradeoffs.
Any engineer can draw a box and call it a solution, but a true engineer has to defend their design against intense, merciless scrutiny. You have to prove why your layout actually works in the real world. So the crucial point here is that you must connect every single design choice back to the rubric. We're talking ownership, access patterns, size, and atomicity. You can't just say, well, I used a PDA because I felt like it. Nope. You need to explicitly write out that a program-owned PDA satisfies the contract-level ownership requirement, and that per-user hot reads are order of one, which completely avoids a massive serialization bottleneck. Document exactly how the rubric drove your choice. Doing this removes all personal bias and grounds your entire architecture in hard, defensible logic. Now let's talk about trade-offs. Check out this hyper-specific, quantifiable example. Choosing a PDA per user increases account count and rent overhead, but allows order of one read and write for individual balances and avoids serialization contention. See, this is fantastic because it's actually testable. You can measure the rent overhead. You can benchmark the read and write speeds. Contrast that with a laughably bad trade-off like, well, it might be slower. Slower where? Slower how? By how many milliseconds? If your trade-off statement sounds like a vague weather prediction, you need to rewrite it immediately. A really strong blueprint fully embraces the exact cost of its choices. And that brings us to Section 4, the final quality check. Think of this as the strict pre-flight inspection checkpoint right before you submit your draft for peer review. If you don't pass this, your architectural design just does not fly. So let's run down this pre-flight checklist rapidly. Are all 5 headings present? Check. Is the source concept precisely named, meaning you actually wrote mapping address to UN 256 instead of just vaguely throwing out the word balances? Check. Is the Solana mapping actionable? Is the rationale tied to at least 2 rubric items? And is the trade-off testable and specific? We want absolutely zero vague generalities slipping into this blueprint. Every single line has to serve a distinct purpose in defending your transition from EVM to SVM. And here is the golden rule, the ultimate strict length check. Does it fit on one printed page? Seriously, if you find your markdown file spilling over onto a second page, you need to step back and prune your verbose sentences. Take those secondary examples or those long-winded edge cases and just banish them to an appendix file. If a reviewer really needs the deep dive, they can go look there. But the blueprint itself, it must remain an isolated, highly focused document. Brevity really is the soul of a good engineering draft. Right before we wrap up, always do a size estimate sanity check. This is basically the process of verifying that your byte math actually adds up. And I'm telling you, this is where so many drafts just completely fall apart under scrutiny. Did you actually include that mandatory 8-byte anchor discriminator? Are your rent buffer calculations completely airtight for the final review? Because if you claim 80 bytes, but your fields only sum up to 20, your peers are going to tear that apart during review. Remember, in the SVM, byte size dictates rent, and rent dictates cost. Do the math, verify your work, and just approach this step with absolute rigor. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative question. Are your trade-offs specific enough to pass the final patent inspection? Remember, a well-crafted one-page draft exposes ambiguities and makes peer review incredibly productive. Quantify your costs, connect back to the rubric, and keep it brief. Thank you so much for joining me on behalf of Forged College. This has been an absolute blast. If you want to dive deeper into this subject and master other incredible Web3 topics, absolutely make sure to visit forged.college to learn more. See you in the next explainer.